One of them is A Homeland in the West, and the other one, her most recent book, is The Hidden History of Utah. And we thought, let's see if we can get her here to speak. So we're really happy she's here. It's Eileen Hallet Stone, and we're really thrilled that she's here. And after she speaks, you can buy her book, The Hidden History of Utah, if you'd like. She doesn't want to have any of the proceeds. She wants all the proceeds to go to the King's English to support local stores. So the book is $20, and it's check or cash made out to the King's English. So thank you, Eileen. Welcome.
I can't believe that I'm having coffee in a school and it actually tastes really fun. I come from Boston in May, and when I first moved out to Utah, when I do swear a little, but I'll try to be very quiet. When I first came out to Utah, I wondered, well, what am I doing here? Why is everybody so blonde and beautifully blonde? Beautifully blonde. And why, where's ethnicity? And I thought, I'm okay. So I started writing about people because that's what I do. I didn't think that's what I did, but it's what I do. I actually used to write for a magazine called Network Magazine. You're all too young to know about it. It was a book. It was a magazine from Salt Lake City written by women, mostly women, for women. You don't know about it. The history is incredible. Karen Shepard was my editor. She was and the publisher. Amazing woman. And I actually had no idea what I was getting myself into when the columnist and editor, Peg McEntee, from Salt Lake Tribune, called me up and said, let's have coffee. Anybody who calls me up and says, let's have coffee is an immediate good friend of mine. And I'm not a good whiskey drinker. I'm a little bit of a wine drinker, but I love my coffee. So she asked me for coffee, invited me out for a chat at the Blue Plate Cafe. Are you familiar with the Blue Plate Cafe? Well, the coffee's not really good there. Oh, tea. Well, what do you know? I love tea too. But if you're a tea drinker, coffee's not that good, except it's really plentiful. And the atmosphere is incredible. And I like it when people leave people alone and they're friendly. If it's too loud, it drives me crazy. But if there's a nice kind of sound, that you can end up actually going through, you can actually think. So she asked me, she said, how about writing about Utah? How about writing just about anything you want to write about? I said, you got to be kidding me. Anything I want to write about? She said, yes. Only, it has to be 650 words. Well, I'm a kibitzer, and I'm from Boston, but I'm also from Maine. And I don't know if you know about Mainers, we're very taciturn. We don't talk much. We never ask for directions. People from Florida. Is anybody here from Florida? Floridians always ask for directions. My husband's from Florida. I would rather go around 20 times than stop and ask anybody. I mean, it's my nature. It's just the way I am. But I said 650 words. She said, yes, and not only that, we won't pay for photographs. You don't pay for photographs. No. In fact, if you write more than 650, we might cut it out. We'll cut out a few lines. I said, the best lines? What do I know? But then she looked at me and said, Eileen, go for it. Take on this state. Look at its diversity and have fun. But remember, 650 words. Well, how could I not say yes? The coffee was okay. The environment was fabulous. She was a terrific editor. She has since been fired from the Salt Lake Tribune. The Tribune is kind of struggling right now. So I'm kind of a person, as you can tell, I talk a lot, so you have to keep time with me. And I'm kind of the person when I go to bed at night, because I thought, gee, any story I can do, what can I do? What kind of story? And I like my husband very much. He's in Uzbekistan right now. He's teaching there on a Fulbright, having a good time. Right now, I think it's nighttime. I'm not really sure. We call each other often on Skype. But I'm the kind that I'll go to bed, and all of a sudden, my hand goes up. I feel like I'm in school in Orono, Maine. Me, pick me. Because I was skinny and I didn't always get picked. But I remember, pick me, and then my husband in bed with me will take my hand and he'll put it down. And he'll say to me, because I wake him up, what is it? I said, I want to write about a Jewish pioneer. I want to write about a Jewish photographer. And he'll say, okay, And then I fall asleep. I'm really happy. And in the morning I say, you woke me up. And I said, really? And I said, yeah. He said, you want to write about a Jewish photographer, a Jewish pioneer? And I did. And so I did. So I want to talk to you about this man, Solomon Nunes Cavallo. He happens to be Jewish. He was a portraiteur. He took photographs of Southern gentry. He took daguerreotypes, and if you have to ask me to tell you about daguerreotypes, we'll be here all day. But do you know a little about daguerreotypes? Okay. He was a Reformed Jew. He endured the extremes of an Arctic-like winter more than once when Colonel John C. Fremont invited him to travel across the country. Fremont, the Pathfinder. He wanted to find a place to put a railroad. Not up that went up by Ogden, but a little lower. And he just wanted to go. He wanted somebody to take photographs of it. He wanted somebody to, and you think I'm memorizing this, and some of it I am, but some of it's just me. Because you have to read the story yourself. 650, if I tell you the whole story. You read it, done. That's ridiculous. So he didn't ask his wife, but his wife knew. He needed a photographer to follow him. He needed somebody who knew how to write to follow him because Fremont wanted to become president. So he wanted someone to chronicle his whole journey. And so he asked this man, Cavallo. Cavallo was a descendant of rabbis and cantors who fled the Spanish Inquisition. Cavallo was born in South Carolina in 1815. His daguerreotyping techniques were crucial to getting photographs. Because do you know when they take pictures, you know how people stand up like this? Well, sometimes they stand this way for 15 minutes to a half hour at a time. And what helps them is they're in a brace. Are you aware of that? They're in a brace. So, I didn't know that either until I started researching. They're in a brace so they don't move. Well, he's out in nature. Do you think an animal is going to be in a brace? No. So he had to learn how to do daguerreotyping really quickly. And he did. He went to explore the Rockies to find a route for the country's first transcontinental railroad. And of course, as I said, Fremont was running for presidency. Well, with little hesitation, Cavallo traded velvet backdrops for rugged chaps, and on August 22nd, 1853, joined a band of diverse, dedicated men disposed to following Fremont wherever he went. I mean, can you imagine that? Wherever he went, they were ready to go. He became his own ostler. He learned how to ride a horse. Of course he did, because he was a little bit of a gentry. And he was a crack shot. He ate deer meat. He staved off porcupine because he likened the pink flesh of the animal to unkosher pork. But he ran with the bison. In fact, he found bison like he couldn't believe. He went and met with some Indians. At the time they were called Indians. But he went with the Indians, and he got on his horse, and he saw these bison. They were just all over. It was so beautiful to see them. Hundreds and hundreds of bison just rolling down, just gambling on the grass. Of course, we killed them. You know that. We wanted the West. And this is not the story, but the best way to get the West is to get rid of Indians is to kill off their livelihood, kill off their food, kill off anything that they can use to make clothing. Let's get rid of the bison, and then we'll have this land. So we're standing on land that maybe we should think about a little more. From the get-go, the party grappled with prairie fires, raging rivers, stolen horses, dwindling food supplies, and delays that led to a winter crossing and mishaps in the Wasatch Mountains. Halfway up a steep pass, a lead mule lost his footing and tumbled several hundred feet down the mountainside to the bottom, taking with him the rest of the mule train and all the supplies just tumbling down. Snowstorms disoriented the men, and slaughtering horses for sustenance doomed them to travel on feet too swollen to fit into boots. Wearing tattered moccasins, Assistant Engineer Oliver Fuller died on the trail, his feet frozen black to the elbow, to his ankles. Lost in deep snowdrifts, Cavallo, too, considered his fate and whether the last bullet in his gun would be aimed at a charging animal or himself. Fremont extracted pledges rejecting cannibalism. Are you aware that on one of Fremont's parties, they actually resorted to eating their dead partners? And he vowed to shoot the first man who hinted at such a proposition. Guided by the stars, he directed his ragtag team safely across the terrain into Parowan. Emaciated and ailing, Cavallo was taken into the polygamous home of a Mr. Heap and his wives, and he was nursed until he was fit for travel to Salt Lake City, and he met with Governor Brigham Young. He photographed, he sketched the well-designed cityscape. He pondered the providence of polygamy. He didn't say it was right, he didn't say it was wrong, he pondered it. He offered no judgment. He was there to see who lives here. And then he resumed his journey westward. Fremont did not become president. The railroad took another tack. Many of Cavallo's plates were destroyed in a fire, and in time, the saga was almost forgotten. But history is a gift that, when nudged, keeps on giving. Revisiting Parowan, Cavallo learned of a child's untimely death. Seeing her, he actually walked by. It was so hard to shorten this for the column. He was coming back to thank the Heaps family for helping him, and he was walking by a dwelling, and he saw a man outside who was crying, and he asked him, he said, "What is wrong? What's wrong, sir?" He said, my daughter died. And so he asked if he could go inside the house to see this daughter. He said yes. He went inside, and there was a woman sitting on the bed, or near the bed, and she was crying really quietly. And he saw the child, and he said she looked like an English child. Her face was so white and pale, and blonde ringlets on her, around her cheeks, and she looked as if she was sleeping in repose, not just slumbering. It was not the repose of death, but just sleeping. And he drew a picture of her on his notebook, and he gave it to the woman, and then he left. The next day, he met with the Heap family, and he thanked them for taking care of him. And then he went on with Fremont's party as they headed on to California, where actually Cavallo's helped set up a Jewish community center there years ago. While he was going to get on to his horse, there was a basket there, and in the basket was some bread and some eggs, and it said, "From a grateful friend." This history, 1853, 1854, I was in Parowan. My husband's a preservation librarian. I go everywhere with him, and he'll stop on a dime, which makes him really good for a writer. If I see something, he stops. I was there while he was talking to the museum people at the Daughter of Top Pioneers in Parowan. I saw a picture. Let's see if I can find the picture. I saw a picture, and you know by now that I don't let anything stop me. I'm really timid. Unless I'm a writer. I actually am timid. You can hurt my feelings really easily, and last night they got hurt, but it's okay. It was okay. But as a writer, nothing hurts me, because you have to pursue your goal. You're set to do something, no matter what you are, and you have to do it. So my husband was talking with someone, one of these Daughters of Utah Pioneer women, and I walked around and I saw a picture of a young child behind broken glass, taped with Scotch tape, which is, you should know, you never do that. I went, oh my God, that's Cavallo. And it was done in 1854. And you can show this if you want. I took the picture. Never, never, ever, when you go to a Daughter of Utah Pioneer, are you allowed to touch anything? Well, I not only touched it, I took it outside, not in the sun, but on the step, and I took a picture of it. And then the woman came out, one of the women, she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "This is the picture that this man drew." They didn't even know. They didn't know. So it's a long story, I won't tell you, but we ended up preserving the picture, giving it back to them behind a glass plate that was really fine, wouldn't get hurt. And then 6 months later, I was giving a talk in the Old Rock Church, and I was telling about Cavallo's story, and there was a woman in the audience and a child. The child was snoring, which I love the sound of a snoring child. There's something just like, he doesn't care. This was so sweet, it just touched my heart. But the woman crying kind of disturbed me, because I thought, oh my God, I swore, because I do swear, I'm from Maine, I can swear. I swore, and I thought, what am I doing? Maybe I did something terrible, because I never want to hurt anybody's feelings. It turned out she was related to the dead child. And she didn't know the story. So that was like one of my first stories for my book, In Homeland in the West. And I thought, if I can do that, I can do anything. I can find everything. Because we don't know much about this state. We don't know much about diversity. We don't know much about, really, who are these people? Do you know about the Pony Express? Do you know it only lasted, like, what, 24 months, 23 months or something? It was 1860, the gold rush was at its peak. Thousands of Eastern prospectors, miners, entrepreneurs, and settlers were carving out new lives in the West. The vast Utah territory still comprised Utah and parts of Wyoming, Colorado, and much of Nevada, and civil war was imminent. The U.S. government, fearing Western secession and alliance with the South, wanted to counter political unrest and bias with the ongoing, up-to-date national news. Distant relatives wanted to hear more often from home. Although Congress had established a postal service to the Pacific coast in 1847, overland stagecoach delivery was simply too slow. To connect the East and the West with improved communication, efficiency, and speed, 3 Western freighters, great men, introduced a spirited transcontinental mail delivery relay system they called the Pony Express. It's right there. That's an original picture. That's why it looks crummy. That's why I love it. Promising mail deliveries within 10 days, the businessmen mapped out a 1,966-mile route and designated some 200 stations that were being built or refurbished along the way. It's like regentrification of the West, only there was nothing there. They gave employment to people. They also introduced custom-designed mochilas stitched with 4 separate padlock leather mail pouches thrown over the saddle. The leather mochila was cut to accommodate a saddle horn and a cantle, and space for a rider's legs. Departing from St. Joseph, Missouri, their route followed the Oregon-California Trail along Nebraska's Platte River and through South Pass, Wyoming. At Fort Bridger, though, riders would divert from the Emigrant Trail and head south of the Great Salt Lake and due west across the Salt Desert to the Sierra Nevada mountain towards Sacramento. Large home stations were staggered 75 to 100 miles apart to house riders and horses. Every 10 or 15 miles, riders would switch horses at smaller relay stations. Before Congress reduced the territory of Utah in 1861, 65 stations marked the territory's route from Pacific Springs, Wyoming to the California border. At stations, corrals, and stalls were being built, the firm hired 400 station keepers and assistants. Broadsides advertised positions for youthful drivers, wanted, young, skinny, wiry fellows not over 18, must be expert riders, willing to risk death daily, orphans preferred. The trails were perilous, nerves of steel a prerequisite. But legends were in the making when 80 fearless young men were hired on, each weighing less than 120 pounds and able to carry 25 pounds of equipment and 20 pounds of mail on horseback. Riding day and night, no matter the weather, riders were paid up to $150 a month. That was good money. To relay U.S. mail across inhospitable wilderness and given 2 revolvers and a knife for defense. The first Pony Express was initiated on April 3rd, 1860 at 7 o'clock in the evening when the grimy and grand Missouri locomotive engineer, Ad Clark, that's his name, Ad Clark, pulled into St. Joseph's Railroad Station after a 206-mile treacherous high-speed race from Hannibal to hand over the first load of mail. At top speeds, riders raced to each relay station, switched horses, and grabbing their mochilas, rode on within 2 minutes. Mark Twain described the exchange as a whiz and a hail. California Mustangs were often used for the Western Trail, Kentucky and Utah Territory thoroughbreds of the Eastern route. Many horses exhibited an uncanny sense of direction and were known to carry a rider through disorienting salt storms and raging blizzards, or not. En route to Utah's Mountain Dell Station, rider George Edwin Little got caught in a heavy winter snowstorm. His horse gave out. Cutting open the locked pouches and tucking the mail inside his shirt, George Edwin Little left the horse behind and broke out on foot. reaching one station by morning, so he just walked all night long. He rode bareback to the next old Salt Lake house and delivered his charge. His horse rescued was none the worse for the ordeal. He went back to get his horse. You need your horse. On October 24th, 1861, the country's coast-to-coast telegraph system was up and running. 2 days later, the Pony Express business was shuttered for good. That's 650 words, by the way. Do you have time for one more story? Are you okay? I have a couple, but I guess I can't talk about prostitutes because it's...
Yeah.
Oh, I can?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, but I'm only going to tell you one. I'm only going to tell you part one, because part two, you're just going to have to get the book or get it at the library. It's cheap, but you can go to Barnes, you can also go to Costco. In fact, I sign books at Costco. But you know, there's an interesting thing. These local bookstores really struggle. Because, oh, you're taking pictures. I never take good pictures. I could take a picture of you and you'd be stunned. Bookstores, local bookstores will be on their way out if we don't support them. You can go to Costco and buy the books cheaper. You buy like 600 of them. Bookstores can buy 30 or 40 at a time. So think about it. If you want to see your bookstore here, you have to support it. So that's just exciting, because I love being single. Although I have to tell you, Costco was very nice to me too. So I want to read you one, but it's the first part. When they said I had only 650, I got a little upset, because how do you push everything into it? In fact, I think I'm having a column come out Sunday, unless I'm booted by the obituaries, which is a possibility, or the paper folds, which is another possibility. And we don't want it to fold. We can't have it fold. But it's really hard. I struggled, and then I had to call my friend for Sunday's paper, Gail Bernstein Chachi, and I had to say, listen, Gail, you're my best friend, and it's about your mother, but forget that it's about your mother, because when you do 650, you got to go for the gusto. You got to go to be alive. You can't bore people. So I hope she's still talking to me. When I started Prostitutes, I had actually written a story of prostitutes for the Network magazine. I had no idea. Do you know there's a lot of prostitutes here? And when they asked me, I had a broken down car. Writers always are supposed to have broken down cars. It makes you legitimate. Of course, my brother has a Beamer, but that's okay. I had a broken down car. And so I got caught once when my car broke down, and I was outside of, well, I know where they change money. I won't tell you where, you shouldn't go there. And I had to find a telephone. This was before cell phone. I had to find a phone, and it's nighttime, and they're exchanging money. I'm going, oh, this is a good story. And then the me part goes, oh, I don't know if I can handle this. And then one time I interviewed 2 truckers about prostitutes, but they were each in his own truck. So I was in my car, and they came up on either side of me, and I couldn't get out of my car, and I'm in a parking lot on the west side of town. I got a little nervous, and then I thought, I'm a writer, so I won't be nervous. So I just asked them a question, they answered me, and they went on their way. However, some of you don't know, as early as 1857, after W.W. Drummond, a family man, an associate justice of the Utah Supreme Court, brought his strumpet, Ada Carroll, to work, introducing her as Mrs. Justice Drummond. Prostitution has been part of Utah's pioneer frontier life. Drummond met Ada while trolling the flesh pots of Washington, D.C. Abandoning his wife and children, he was eventually exposed and expelled for his scandalous behavior. But within a year, several brothels were already up and running around Camp Floyd, the short-lived garrison in Utah County. And after the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, well, you know this, in 1869, there was no holding back of life's oldest and most profitable profession. Whether called prostitutes, ladies of the night of the calling, or simply soiled doves, by the 1870s, these women tended a robust business in the red light district of Commercial Street in downtown Salt Lake City. So you know Commercial Street. Downtown? You know downtown? Yeah. Okay. Downtown. Located between 100 South and 200 South, You got to get in your car and start exploring your town. From Main to State Street, parlor houses and cribs. Oh, do you know where the Gateway is?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. There you have it, some of it. Parlor houses and cribs stretched out among legitimate businesses, tobacco shops, liquor stores, saloons, and cafes. Second-story rooms over these enterprises were rented out nightly to prostitutes who would sit on the stairway and invite potential clients to come up and see me. Mae West was not the only one who knew how to say that. In refined parlor houses run by madams, however, there were no displays of public solicitation. One rang a bell, an electric bell, for admission, was greeted by a well-tailored attendant, and escorted into an elegant room dressed in plush red, of course, red fabrics, draperies, and gilded mirrors. John Held Jr. worked as a newspaper cartoonist for the Salt Lake Tribune, and he moved to the East Coast where he gained national recognition for his illustrations and block prints depicting America's jazz age. His friend, and I can't remember his name right now, started the New Yorker magazine. He had chance to glimpse this nocturnal civilization while accompanying his uncle on calls to repair gambling machines. It was said that the elegance of these palaces surpassed the lavishness of even New Orleans, wrote Held in his published memoirs. That was probably hearsay, as a gold or silver miner or cattle or sheep man's idea of elegance was moot in the extreme. Ada Wilson, one of the city's earliest madams, operated a luxurious parlor, including a professor and his piano in the drawing room. She also took daily rides in a splendid hackney-drawn dog cart. Helen Blazes, a more conservative madam, accommodated the wealthy and served only wine at her establishment. Clients paid dearly for Catherine Flint's prostitutes, food, and entertainment. Doggedly working her way into society, the courtesan paid close attention when items of Brigham Young's property were seized during the divorce settlement between the LDS leader and his plural wife, Anne Eliza. In November 2nd, 1876 issue of the Tribune, in the City Jottings column, it was rumored yesterday that Mrs. Catherine Flint had purchased Brigham's closed carriage and would have his coat of arms erased and have hers substituted. Business was business, and many madams carried engraved calling cards printed by the Held Engraving Company. John Held Jr., affectionately called the Mormon Kid, because it was a Mormon family, he was always called the Mormon Kid, reported that the madams demanded of his family's print shop the finest and most expensive engraving on the best vellum stock. These cards were smaller than the social standard and difficult to produce by hand from a copper plate. They weren't the size of your business card. They were smaller than that. Very delicate. But the run was long. The money was fresh, and there was never any quibbling about price. In 1886, Salt Lake City was a lively boomtown. An estimated 6 brothels, series of one-night cribs, and numerous saloons and gambling houses inundated the area, and so infuriated the townspeople they rose in protest. Police conducted raids. Clients fled. Of course, clients' men always flee. Prostitutes were arrested, checked for infections, and then they were fined. But it wasn't enough. By 1908, historian Hal Schindler wrote, "There came a hue and a cry to clean up the city, and the idea of a stockade came into existence. Out of sight, out of mind, still in business. A stockade." You have to read the second part to know what the stockade is. So I can read one more about the woman who talked to God? Okay, but that's all, because they're short pieces. I found that story because I was going with my husband. And by the way, well, that's another story. So I found that story driving with my husband. I said, you know, Utah really breeds a lot of different, you can get really involved with different religions in Utah. So involved, it becomes really your own. I mean, you can even make up a religion if you wanted to. I mean, it's okay. You can do it here. But I wonder, and we drove by Monticello one day on the way we were heading out towards Blanding. You know Blanding? Fabulous place, Blanding. Oh, Hoven Week, fabulous. You should go take your kids there. And I said, I don't know why, but I think I heard of the Home of Truth. Have you ever heard of that? Well, I don't know how I ever hear. I don't know how I hear of things. I think they come to me at night, my hand goes up, my husband takes a note. When I was about 7 years old, living in Orono, Maine, the wall by my bed, my mother didn't mind this because they painted every year, but I would wake up and write. I have a man's name, Peter Callip. I don't know who he is. I'm still after him. My husband's fine with it. But, you know, I would write stories because I've been writing ever since I was 6 years old. So I would just put names up, and my bedroom wall was my nighttime escape, and I loved it. So then, I read in the newspaper recently about, maybe 3 or 4 months ago, about a Japanese family who built a house saying, this house, you will live long forever. It's a New York Times article. You will live forever if you live in a house like this. The house was squat. It was an apartment. You had to bend down. The floors were slanted. And they figured if you could balance yourself and not kill yourself, you could live forever. That was another religion. So, near to God and far from man, Marie Ogden founded a religious community in the wilderness of Dry Valley, 14 miles north of Monticello in San Juan County. Do you know where that is? In 1930, she raised 2 daughters and was active in community affairs and welfare reform. After her husband died, though, from cancer in 1929, the grieving wife turned to metaphysics and spiritualism to communicate between this world and the next. She was encouraged by a man she met, William Dudley Pelley. I don't know if you know of him. You should. He's anti-Semitic. He briefly supported Hitler. He actually was like with the brown shirts. Terrible man. And when she realized he was terrible, she no longer had anything to do with him. He started the Silver Legion in honor of Adolf Hitler. And they actually had people happening in Ogden because of the Silver Legion. So parting ways with this man, although this man could speak to the other world, other world, she wove astrological elements, numerology into her metaphysical study and touted this esoteric philosophy across state lines. She lectured on the occult, natural disasters, preordained catastrophes, final judgment, reincarnation, resurrection, and redemption. Doesn't it sound familiar? She believed herself to be divinely informed. She communicated with God through her typewriter. You did get that, didn't you? Through her typewriter, through the typewriter keys. One revelation, this is what happens when you live in Utah and you can't laugh at something that's really, really pretty outrageous, but that's okay. One revelation delivered through its keys led the psychic to Utah's high desert to purchase 1,000 acres of land. Another automatic writing prophesied a cataclysmic meltdown of the world, a transformation in southeastern Utah from arid desert to a tropical paradise, and a rebirth of society from within the commune's faithful. True believers from New York to Boise descended on the new utopia. The home of truth, God bless you, thanks. The home of truth comprised of 3 physical groupings, constructed several miles apart, called portals. In the outer portal, colonists built a communal home, a single men's dormitory, woodshop, and guest quarters. The middle portal contained residential homes, multi-use buildings, commissary, chapel, and an unfinished cobblestone church. The inner portal, according to Ogden, was sited on the exact center of the Earth's axis, guaranteeing everyone's survival. This complex included cabins for single women, Ogden's domicile, and later her grand piano. At its height, 100 colonists relinquished their personal possessions and financial assets that, collected by Ogden, went towards the betterment of the community. They cleared ground and built a windmill-powered water pump, concrete cistern, homes, and furniture. They gave up tobacco, alcohol, and wrestled with celibacy. Some unsuccessfully prospected for gold in the Blue Mountains. Others, unable to farm the hardscrabble land, leased garden plots near Monticello, or worked for hire. A few raised chickens and purchased local beef and mutton. After another revelation, and probably very little money, there were those who ceased eating meat. In 1934, Ogden bought the San Juan Record, and as a publisher-editor added a column on the metaphysics. She received ongoing communication from God. Convinced she could raise the dead, she offered the promise of an afterlife. Cancer-riddled Edith Parshek of Boise, Idaho, took stock in the seer's self-promoted restorative powers. She and her husband Elmer were colony members and contributed generously, hoping for a cure. News in 1935, Mrs. Parshek died of cancer. News of her death, though, was kept quiet because the poor woman was actually in between worlds. To stimulate Parshek's pledged revival, Ogden applied resuscitation therapy, ritualistic washing, forced feedings, and laying of the hands 3 times daily for 4 months on a dead corpse. By the time the county sheriff got wind of the corpse, he determined Parshek's mummified body posed no death, no health risk because the climate was so dry. 2 years later, Ogden publicized her intent again to revive Parshek. The state of Utah and Parshek's son requested a death certificate. No body was found. Ogden insisted neither death nor suggested cremation had occurred, and members fled. Largely abandoned, Ogden lived in the colony for nearly 40 years. She wrote metaphysical papers, taught piano to Monticello children, and used her typewriter to converse with God and Mrs. Parshek. At 91, Marie Ogden died in a nursing home in Blanding with no resuscitation requested. Those are some of my stories. I don't want to laugh at her. I don't like to laugh at anybody. This is a woman, you think about it, at that time, she had the gumption, never mind the religious stuff, she had the gumption to do something on her own. She had the gumption to say, I can't stand that my husband, whom I loved, and my children are grown up and they're gone, I can't stand it. I'm going to do something. And she did it. You have to give this woman credit, that she took a trail, a route I might not necessarily take. There's another story, but she did take that trail. One of the things when you interview people and you look for stories, you really can't judge, and it's really hard because obviously you know me by now, I do have my own opinions, but I feel like Cavallo. I put my opinions aside because it's not about me. So when I take and find these stories, I really try to find them about them. I found stories, and you have to read it, about a suffragist woman. I can't tell you the story, but it's just good, it's just to die for. This woman went on her own as a suffragist. We had most things happening here in Utah. We had 300 Jews living in Clarion. I'm sure you all know that story. The agricultural colony of Clarion. That's somewhere southeast. I think it's southeast. We have stories of this man who was McGillis' father, Chick McGillis, Charles. He was also Chick. He was a fighter. But I can't tell you that story. You have to find it. But he was such an incredible man. You couldn't best him. He was a really good fighter. He was amazing. And so I interviewed Dick McGillis about his dad. He actually had this Salt Lake Tribune. It's a traveling carton. He had a cart. He had the newspapers in it. You could go outside and buy it. He was one of the first. It was like a newsstand. He also ran the Newsies. Do you know about the Newsies, the Newsboys? They were amazing. Well, you have to read about it because you should know about it. Because these are kids, some of them were as young as 6 years old, going out and working as a newsboy. This is before child labor laws came into effect. This is when mothers who might not be well sent their kids out to work, or their husbands were minors and they had to work. This man took care of them, along with Russell Tracy, who owned a bank. There were so many fabulous, fabulous stories. I went to help her one time, and this guy talked to me, and he started telling me about the Carbon County No. 2 mine explosion. Well, I looked it up, and I cried, because you see these men of such diversity and such devotion, leaving their Greek wives behind or just bringing them on board, and they died. And their names alone, I thought, somebody's got to keep saying these names, you know, because they died, needlessly died. And so I had to write their names. my editor wouldn't let me write all 172 or whatever they were. So I had to slim them down. I was in Costco, actually, and a young woman walked by, looked at the book and said, I wonder if you have my great-grandfather, my grandfather, couldn't remember which, in the book. He was in the Castlegate Mine No. 2 explosion. I said, what did he do? Thinking, oh my God, what if I left his name? Yeah. So she said he was one of the rescuers who died. The only one rescuer who died. People came from as far away as Montana to come down to rescue these people. The Greek community came. There were so many Greeks who died, men, that they were using just anything. They couldn't even recognize the bodies when they were taking them out. So I said, well, what is this gentleman's name? And he told me the name, and you know, I knew she was going to say it was that person, because that's what happens when you write. You always get connected. And it was. I went to the book, and the name was there. And she just, well, we hugged. It was a little, you had to hug. I mean, and she was so proud to have his name, you know, right there. So this is what happens. I interviewed Joanne McGillis. You know what she's like. She's stunning. She's lively. She's opinionated. She's fabulous. She has stories I can't tell you. Because I'd get in trouble. I interviewed her. And then I interviewed her husband. That's how I learned about his dad. I had to separate them. Because when you interview people together, you never get the whole truth. You might not get the whole truth anyway. But you do better if you separate people. So I've done a lot of interviewing. I don't know where my book is, so I can't. Oh, it's right here. So I got a call from the press in South Carolina. They asked me to do this. I called the Tribune, and they said to do it. So I've written about Italians. I have to do that too. Italians and Greeks, African Americans living in chicken coops. African Americans living in chicken coops because nobody would rent them a house. And then I live in Sugar House down the street, down the road, where I live. I talked to my neighbor. I said, I can't believe that this was not a good area. Blacks couldn't live here. And she brought me papers that said right on it that you couldn't rent to a black. So I had to write about it. I get in trouble when I write. When I write about the Holocaust, I have people call me. I had John Price, Price Realty. He called me and said, do you have alarms on your house? And I said, no, I have a little sugar house. Why am I going to have an alarm on my house? But I got mail through the newspaper, and they threw it out, and then to my home, that it never happened, even today. It never happened. And I'm like, so it just inspires me into action. I just have to keep, writing. There are stories about Depression days. There's stories about this wonderful man, Bamberger, who was the first Democrat and only Jewish governor of Utah. His stories are incredible. There was a story about how Murray got its name. I mean, how did towns get their name? What if we were called Tooele? Oh, there is a Tooele. How does Tooele get their name? The Greeks were incredible people. The Greeks actually worked in the mines, but they quickly wanted to get out of the mines, and they built houses and restaurants. The Greeks are incredible. There were stories about a peach. I don't know if you know that Utah had the early Alberta peach. Are you aware of that? Kaysville. This doctor, a doctor did it. He's a doctor and a dentist, and he's everything, and a mayor, I think, at one time. He actually developed a peach from a nursery in North Carolina. And that peach had to travel. So it's in the book, how the peach traveled. Hundreds of miles, thousands of miles, how the peach traveled and whether it survived. Bicycles, we needed bicycles. Why did the bicycles also come up? Because we needed better roads. The bicyclists, the wheelmen created the roads that we're on now because they wanted good roads to ride their bicycles. Women, great story in here about women because, by God, women couldn't ride a bike. It was sexual. And they didn't listen to anybody. Women would look around and just go the way they were going. They didn't do any signals. You get two women together, my God, you were looking for an accident. That was a fabulous story. Then I got to cars. I was sitting on, well, it's actually another, and I said, what about women drivers? So I got a story about a woman driver. She was incredible. Yes, she was followed by a support car that took photographs. However, they did it themselves. She even got bed bugs. I mean, it was incredible because she traveled all the way across. There are stories about just everything. Because Utah, to me, started to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And it still is. It still is big. So unless you have a question, oh, the Japanese, do you know about Delta Topaz? This is the first time in maybe 5 years the Japanese were starting to really tell their story. And I was so fortunate to get some stories because these people were getting old, like Holocaust survivors. They were getting old. And I think they talked to me to shut me up probably, but they loved to, there was a relationship. And so I have a lot of Japanese stories, And on my last story is about a Jewish woman, and you'll have to read it, but I found it because I went to a party at the Symphony Opera House or somewhere where they practiced. It was a big party for somebody. Big party, birds and all that. I'm not into that, but it was big party. And we're driving over, and I said to my husband, Randy, the road feels different. He said, it does? I said, yeah. Could you stop for a minute? The road feels different. He said, oh, come on, Eileen, we got to go to this party. They're expecting the mayor's there. Everybody's there. We got to go. No, the road feels different to me. So I got out, and it was. It was a regular road, and then all of a sudden it became a brick road. A brick road downtown. So I had to ponder about that, which I did. And then I had to find out about it, which I did. And then I had to write a story about it, which of course you know I did. So for me, I just have to pretend I'm not me. I have to pretend I'm not really having real judgment. I have to pretend I'm not from the East Coast. I have to do a lot of pretending so I can get into being a writer and give these people the justice, the honor, use their words, use their thoughts. This is not revisionist history. This is real history from the very people. So that's it. Did you have a question? Did I overtalk?
No.